B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Irovin daf samach base. We're going to start a new perek hador, that starts at the bottom of daf samach aleph omid base. Says the Mishnah, hador im ha'akum b'chotzer, oy im mi she'enoi moida ba'eruv, hareze oyser olov. And let's just recap. When it comes to carrying on Shabbos, till now we've discussed at length walking on Shabbos. Just are you allowed to go on Shabbos to beyond the tchum? Now we're going back to the issa of carrying on Shabbos. Min ha-Torah, one is not allowed to carry from a reshus hayochid into a reshus harabim, or vice versa, from a reshus harabim into a reshus hayochid. There's also an issa to carry within a reshus harabim for amos, but that's not our discussion now. What's considered a reshus hayochid? Anything enclosed is technically speaking, biblically speaking, a reshus hayochid, irrespective of how many people it's serving or it belongs to. So any chotzer, a courtyard, the roofs, and in other cases like a movoi, the alleyways, especially those that are surrounded on three sides, they all have the status of a reshus hayochid min ha-Torah. So if you have a courtyard with any number of homes that it's serving, and every home belongs to its own owner, and the chotzer itself, the courtyard, is serving all those owners, since the courtyard itself is a reshus hayochid, carrying from the home, from the houses to the chotzer, and vice versa, is something which is mutter min ha-Torah. However, the Chachomim said that since the home belongs to one reshus hayochid, and the chotzer belongs to a different reshus hayochid, or to other reshus hayochids as well, it's serving more than one person and serving a different person to the individual owners of each particular home. Therefore, it's similar somewhat to carrying from one domain to another. And if that were to be allowed, people will confuse that and think one can carry even from reshus hayochid into reshus harabim. They therefore said you're not allowed to carry from a bayis, a home, into a chotzer, a courtyard, on Shabbos. The only way that the Chachomim allowed us to carry from a bayis to a chotzer is if you can turn the entire chotzer into being a single domain, and not just a single domain, the same domain as any one of the homes. That means if all the homeowners all merge to become affiliated to one of the homes, and then or by default the chotzer will be serving that home, and everybody else will be, so to speak, a guest to that person, then the homes will be considered as one, the chotzer will be considered as the same one, and then one can carry from the homes to the chotzer, and vice versa, and back. The question is, what happens if you've got in the chotzer, besides for a Yisrael or two living in the chotzer, having their own homes, the courtyard is also shared with non-Jewish owners, with goyim? The question is, since this chotzer, technically speaking, is serving also a goy and also Yisrael, then even if all the Yisraels make an eruv, but the goy is out of the eruv, and then the chotzer will be serving the Yisrael and the goy. So even if all the Yisraels were to merge, the chotzer would be serving the merged Yisrael and the goy. It will be serving two domains. Again, it will be also to carry from any of the homes, either from the Yisrael or from the goy, into the chotzer. What do we do? Now this perek is going to discuss three different ways that one can actually merge all the homeowners of a chotzer. One is called an eruv, the typical eruv that we've discussed a little bit, and we will discuss a little bit more still, where all the people, they represent themselves, or they send some food to one of the homes, and a person's mind, his residence, is established where his food is. So if all the homeowners take some food and put it into one home, it's as if they're all residing in that one home, and then they're all merged into one. There's another way, and that is being mevatel reshus. If a person says, if one of the homeowners says to another homeowner, my share in the chotzer, I'm giving it up to you. I'm being mafkrit. I'm making a hefker. I'm just giving it up to you. So now the chotzer is not serving that person anymore. And as long as all the others have made an eruv, then the chotzer belongs to that one entity that has made the eruv, and again, it's carrying from one home to a chotzer belonging to that one home. Again, that will be mutter. There's another way of merging people, and that is by schirus. If somebody rents, he hires out his share in his home, in his chotzer, to one of the other people in the chotzer, then it's as if both homes belong to that one person, the one who has actually hired the reshus or part of a reshus in that home. And we have to now discuss, when it comes to a goy, can he join an eruv? Can he be mevatel his reshus? And can he do schirus, and how? So let's see the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Hadar imo akum, if somebody lives with an akum, the literal translation of akum is ovid kechovim umazolis, is idolaters, is idol, people who serve idols, but it means any goy in a chotzer, they are sharing the same chotzer. Or with somebody who does not accept the halachas of eruv, even though he may be considered as a Yisrael, and we already saw in the Gemara on Daf Lamed Aleph, this is referring to a kuti, and they were people that did not accept. Their conversion was questionable. Hareze oiser olav. Then that particular person, the goy or the kuti, he restricts the Yisrael from being able to carry from the Yisrael's home into the chotzer, and for that matter, from a Yisrael cannot even carry from the goy's home into the chotzer, because any one of the homes belongs just to one owner, but the chotzer belongs to more than one owner, and therefore one would not be allowed to carry from any bias to the chotzer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, L'olam einoi oiser al sheyu shnei Yisraelim oisrim ze al ze. It's owned that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that if there's one Yisrael sharing a courtyard with one goy or with a kuti, then the kuti will not aser the Yisrael. We will not consider the chotzer as belonging to two entities. We will consider the chotzer as belonging only to the Yisrael, and therefore the Yisrael can certainly carry from his own home to the chotzer, and from the chotzer to his own home. And we'll discuss later whether he can also carry from the goy's home or not. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that if there's two Yisraelim who are sharing the same chotzer, and so therefore the chotzer belongs at least to two entities, to two homes, and since the two Yisraelim oiser zel zeh, they restrict each other from carrying in the chotzer, then if there's also a goy there, then even if the two Yisraelim make an eruv, the goy will actually destroy the eruv, and the Yisraelim will not be able to carry there, all the while that the goy is there. We'll have to see what can be done, but an eruv cannot be done. And we'll discuss in the Gemara the difference between the Tanakama, who happens to be Reb Meir, who says that any time a goy and a Yisrael share a chotzer, there's an issue, but Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who holds that only if there's two Yisraelim and a goy, then there's an issue, but if there's one Yisrael and one goy, then there's no problem. Continues the Gemara, the Mishnah, Omer ben Gamliel, Ma'aseh b'tziduki echad. The tzidukim, they were Yisraelim. There was no question as to whether they were Yisrael or goyim. Unlike the kutim, where the conversions were questionable, the tziduki was a Yisrael. However, they were heretics, and for whatever reason it was that's discussed in Rishonim, the tzidukim did not accept the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, and they didn't believe in the whole concept of needing to have an eruv and not being able to carry from a chotzer to a bayis, which is only a rabbinical halacha. They did not accept all that. So, Ma'aseh b'tziduki echad, shehoyo dor imonu b'movi b'Yerushalayim. And the Chachamim said that even having a tziduki living in a chotzer together with a Yisrael can cause a problem. So there was this incident that there was this tziduki that was living in a movui, in an alleyway in Yerushalayim together with some Yisraelim. This is Rabbi Gamliel talking. It was in the alleyway. And even though till now we've been talking about bayis and chotzer, the same halachas apply to a movui. We've discussed earlier in the Masechta that typically courtyards serve homes and alleyways serve courtyards. In a typical courtyard there would have been 2 or more homes, and in a typical alleyway there would be 2 or more chatzeros. In the same way as carrying from a bayis to a chotzer needs to have an eruv, Eruve chatzeros, so too if the chatzeros want to carry in the alleyway in the mavui, you need to also make an eruv called shitufei muvois, which is a very similar concept to Eruve chatzeros. Besides, for making an eruv, you also have to fix the mavui with a koira or a lechi, as we discussed in the first perek. So there was this mavui, and there was a tzeduki that was with them in this mavui. V'omar lonu abba, and Gamliel says that his father told him, Mi'aru v'hitziu es hakelim lemavui. Hurry, as soon as Shabbos sets in, take your utensils out from your homes into the mavui, which means that you be the first ones to use the mavui on Shabbos. Before this tzeduki, who's going to, if he puts his kelim into the mavui before you, he will destroy our eruv. However, if you take your utensils out before him, then the eruv will be valid. And this tzeduki, since he was definitely a Yisrael, he could be mafkir, be mevatel his chelek. He could relinquish his own part. He could relinquish his right in the chotzer to the other people in the chotzer. And that's what this tzeduki did. However, since he was relinquishing his rights, is only good all the while that he doesn't use the chotzer. If he's going to use the chotzer, he's clearly changed his mind and has reclaimed his rights. And therefore, the Abba, the father, told Rabbi Gamliel, make sure that you use the chotzer first, and if you use the chotzer first, then the bittul, the relinquishing of the rights of this tzeduki will be valid, and therefore you can then carry the rest of Shabbos. If the tzeduki were to use and carry in the chotzer before you manage to, then he's undone, so to speak, his bittul, and then you will not be able to carry in the mavui. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'loshen acher. Rabbi Yehuda said that Rabbi Gamliel's father didn't say, quickly go and use the mavui before the tzeduki does. He says, Mi'aru v'asu tzorcheichem b'mavui. He says it's not even going to help you to use the mavui before the tzeduki, because at any point the tzeduki could change his mind and use the mavui and undo the bittul, and if he undoes the bittul, then it will become apparent that from the beginning of Shabbos you were never allowed to carry in the mavui, and therefore even before Shabbos sets in, make sure that you do anything you need to do in the mavui, because on Shabbos proper, on Shabbos itself, you will not be able to use the mavui. Ma'aruva also tzarcheichem b'mavui, attend to all your needs in the mavui before Shabbos sets in, because at some point this tzeduki may carry his utensils into the mavui, and then you will be restricted from using the mavui from that point on, and it could be that it will even have been osa retroactively from the beginning of Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Yosiv Abaya bar Ovin v'Rav Chinana bar Ovin, Abaya and Rav Chinana, the sons of Ovin, they were sitting, v'Yosiv Abaya Gabayu, and Abaya was sitting near them. V'Yosiv v'Ka'omru, they were discussing the following. It's Bishlei Reb Meir. We can understand the view of the Tanakama in our Mishnah that we know is Reb Meir. Kosov ardiras oived kechovim shma dira. He holds that the residence of a goy is considered a residence, and therefore if you have one Yisrael with a goy sharing the same chotzer, the chotzer is serving 2 residents, and then you cannot carry from the bayis to the chotzer, or from the chotzer to the bayis, and that's what the Mishnah says, that hareze oiser olav. Lo yishno chad, lo yishno trei. It doesn't matter if there's one Yisrael living there, or if there's 2 Yisraelim living there, if there's also a goy living there, and the diras akum shmo dira, the residence of a goy is considered a residence, and therefore there will be an issa, they will not be able to carry in the chotzer. Elo Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, however, the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who says that there's a difference and it depends whether there's 1 Yisrael or 2, Maika Sova, how are we supposed to understand his opinion? Ika Sovar, if Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov holds, Diras Eved Chovim Shmo Dira, that the residence of a goy is considered a residence, Afilu Chad Nami Te'oser, then even if there's just one Yisrael sharing the chotzah with the goy, there should be an issue that each home belongs to one person, the chotzah belongs to two, and one should not be allowed to carry midrabanon from any of the homes into the chotzah. V'i lo yishmo dira. In the event that Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that the residence of a goy is not considered a residence at all, and we'll soon see later that in the same way as if you have a pen with lots of animals living in it, and we don't say that the pen is shared by a number of residences, because that an animal is not considered having a residence. It might live there, but it's not called a reshus. He doesn't have a dira. So if a goy is if that's the status of a goy's residence is similar to those of an animal relative to ownership in the chotzah, then it doesn't matter if there's one Yisrael or two Yisraelim, the goy should not be an issue at all. And as long as the two Yisraelim make an eruv, the goy should not restrict their being able to use the chotzah. It says, if Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that the residence of a goy is not considered a residence, then even if there's two Yisraelim there, why should there be a problem? Amalu Abaya. Abaya, who was there and he was listening to Abaya bar Ovin and Rav Chinana bar Ovin discussing this, so Abaya added in, he said as follows, he asked them, is it so clear to you that the reason that Reb Meir said that if you've got one Yisrael sharing a courtyard with one goy, that the goy restricts the Yisrael from being able to use the chotzah, is it so clear to you that the reason is because the dira, the residence of a goy, is considered a residence? Well, Tanya, did we not learn about Reb Meir's own opinion in a brisa? The courtyards belonging to a goy, harehu kedir shel behema, is similar to a stable belonging to animals, being used by animals, that we don't say that it's the stable is being shared by different residences, and a goy's home is just like a stable. And therefore we do not consider the chotzah as belonging to an additional another owner, and therefore even we would, according to that, even one Yisrael or even two Yisraelim with a goy, the goy should not restrict the use of the chotzah at all for the Yisrael. Why then, according to Reb Meir in our Mishnah, even if you have just one Yisrael with one goy, does the goy restrict the residence? This contradicts what Reb Meir himself said, that the residence of a goy is not considered a residence. Elo, it must be. Everybody, both Reb Meir and Reb Eliezer, in our Mishnah, they both hold, Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, they both hold that the residence of a goy is not considered a residence. What are they arguing about? Chachomim were concerned that a Yisrael should not chas v'shalom learn from and not be influenced from the behaviors and the actions, the ways of the goyim, and therefore they wanted to make it as uncomfortable as possible for Yisrael to live in the close proximity of a goy. So Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov Sovar, Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, the second opinion in our Mishnah, he holds, Kiven do'evet kechovim choshud ashvichas domim, since a typical goy is suspected of murder, therefore no Yisrael in his right mind would want to live on his own in a chotzah with a goy. And therefore, since a Yisrael would not live with a goy, then in the event that you have the odd case, a peculiar Yisrael who's happy to share a chotzah with a goy, it's so rare that the Chachomim did not find it necessary to decree any restrictions there. And they just said that since a goy, we know that his residence is not considered a residence, so he does not restrict the Yisrael. But if you have two Yisrael, trade the shchicha de dairu, if you have two Yisraelim sharing a chotzah with a goy, and that is more common, more accepted, Gozru buhu, the Chachomim said, we're going to make a gezerah, and the gezerah is that the goy restricts the Yisrael's ability to use the chotzah on Shabbos. However, the Chachomim did want to allow the Yisrael some way that he could use the chotzah, because sometimes they have no choice and they have to share a chotzah with the goy, even though there's a negative influence from the goy. So they said that what you have to do is that you have to actually rent, you have to hire part of the reshus of the goy from the goy, and we assume the goy will not want to do this, he'll be suspicious, and therefore it will make it complicated, and that will cause the Yisraelim to move away from there, which is what the Chachamim wanted. But if you have just one Yisrael living with the goy, it's such a rare occurrence, the Chachamim did not find it necessary to make a gzeira. Chad lo ishchiach lo gozru bei Rabbanon. Reb Meir said, Zimnin de mikra v'dair. It could be that even a single Yisrael is going to live in a chotzer with a goy, and the Chachamim did not want Yisrael to live with the goy in such close proximity. He may learn from the ways of the goy and may be influenced by him, and therefore even with just one Yisrael, even though it's very uncommon, Reb Meir said that if you have a goy living there, you cannot use the chotzer. Not because it's considered that the chotzer belongs to two residences. No. Just because the Chachamim said that it's as if we're making a decree that you have to view the chotzer as if it belongs to two residences, and being a goy, he cannot join in the Eruv. The only way you can get around it is with schirus, which is, we'll soon see the schirus, the renting and hiring from the goy, and since that's very complicated and is doomed to fail, the goy will not accept those conditions, and that will force the Yisrael to move away from them. V'omru Rabbanon, the Chachamim, which is now referring both to Reb Meir and to Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, they both held, Ein Eruv Moel b'mokim ovid kechovim. Where there's a goy, they cannot make a regular Eruv of everybody giving some bread into one of the homes. That does not work. V'ein bitul reshus moel ba'ovid kechovim. What we mentioned before regarding the tzidukim, who are definitely Yisraelim, when it comes to the goy and the kuti, they cannot use bittul. As we said before, bittul means they relinquish their rights in the chotzer to the Yisraelim, to the other residents in the courtyard. And the only thing that works, ache yaskir, the only thing that will allow the Yisrael to actually use the chotzer is if the goy, he rents out to the Yisrael his share in the chotzer. And the typical goy will not want to rent out to Yisrael on a weekly basis, every Shabbos, his part in the chotzer, and the Yisrael will want to carry in the chotzer. He will not be able to, and that will make him move away from the goy, which is exactly what we want. And now the Gemara is going to discuss why should a goy not want to rent to the Yisrael every Shabbos his part in the chotzer. My tama, why would the goy be reluctant to rent to Yisrael his right in the chotzer? Are you going to say because he's worried that the Yisrael will eventually take over the entire chotzer and not give the goy his rights to the chotzer back? Well, that depends on the level of the rental that needs to be done in order to allow the Yisrael to carry in the chotzer. We'll soon see it's machlekas ha'meroim. According to the opinion that says that you need to have a very strong type of rental, a very formal type of rental, then we can understand that the goy will not want to rent to the Yisrael. But according to the opinion we're about to see, who says that it's sufficient, at least regarding the Eruv here for the chotzer, it's sufficient to just have a weak type of a rental. We'll soon see what that is. And then if it's just a weak type of rental, there's no risk of the Yisrael actually taking over the entire chotzer from the goy. Then ma'ikal meimer. Then how are we going to understand why should the goy not want to rent out to the Yisrael on a weekly basis? The itmar. And where did we see this? The itmar, we already learnt that Rav Chizda Omar schirus b'ria ba'inon. Schirus b'ria. Rav Chizda holds you need to have a very strong type of rental in order to be able for the Yisrael to use the chotzer on Shabbos. Rav Sheisha Somar schirus ruah. Rav Sheisha says that it's enough if it's just a very weak type of rental. And the Gemara is going to explain. Mai ruah, mai bria. What does it mean, a weak type of rental and a strong type of rental? How does that manifest itself? Ilema bria bepruta. Are you going to say that bria bepruta ru'ua bepachis mishava pruta? Are you going to say that what it means, that according to Rav Chizda, you have to do the rental using a full pruta, which as far as the halachas regarding Yisrael, it's the smallest value that we give any significance to. So are you suggesting that according to Rav Chizda, you need to do the rental with a pruta, and according to Rav Sheshes, it's sufficient to do a rental, a weaker rental, which means to pay even less than a pruta? The Gemara says that can't be. Omar, is there anybody that holds that can it be that Rav Chizda says that you cannot do a rental from a goy with less than a shava pruta, and that's what's determining a strong rental or a weak one? It was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, you should know, that you can rent from a goy even with less than the value of a pruta. It was also said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, where do we find that even less than a pruta has value and significance regarding a goy? Something we never find regarding Yisrael. It says, Ben Noach nerag al pochis mishava pruta. A goy who steals, and that's one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. If a goy steals, and he does not have the mitzvah of returning something he steals, and we know that a goy, as soon as he transgresses one of the 7 mitzvahs, he's chayiv misa. And the Ben Noach, this goy, nerag, he gets killed al pochis mishava pruta, if he steals even less than the value of a pruta. So you see that regarding a goy, even less than a pruta has value. And he's got no mitzvah of laheshiv hezagzela, and therefore he cannot undo the avera of stealing, and therefore he gets killed. But you see that even less than a shava pruta is significant to the goy, and therefore everybody would agree that you can rent from a goy by paying even less than a pruta. And even Rav Chizda would agree with that. If so, what does Rav Chizda mean when he says you need a schirus bria, you need a very healthy, a strong type of schirus? Ela bria, what does it mean? A rental which is very heavy, which is very strong, it means b'moyharke v'aburgane, which means that to be allowed to fill up the entire chotzer with benches and chairs. So Rav Chizda says that the rental has to be such that the Yisrael who's renting the goy's part of the chotzer can even fill up the entire chotzer with benches and chairs. And then the goy would have reason to believe that just a minute, he's taking over the whole chotzer and filling it all up. Maybe he's going to overrun my part of the chotzer, and therefore the goy will not want to rent it to the Yisrael. And that's what the Chachamim wanted. They wanted to pose that challenge to the Yisrael that he should not be able to have this rental. Ru'ua. What does it mean? What Rav Sheshes says it was sufficient to have a weaker type of rental. It means that a type of rental that does not allow the Yisrael to fill up the entire chotzer with benches and chairs. So the Gemara says, according to Rav Chizda, who says that that when you rent the chotzer from the goy, you have to be able to use it even to fill it up with benches and chairs, and then we can understand that the goy would not want to do that, and then the Chachamim would have reached their goal of making it difficult for the Yisrael to live in close proximity with the goy. According to Rav Sheshes, who says that it suffices to make just a weak type of rental, and the goy would have no issue with giving and renting his chotzer on that level to the Yisrael, what have the Chachamim achieved by saying that you have to rent it from the goy? Because according to the letter of the law, a goy's residence is not called residence, it's like a stable with animals. Just the Chachamim instated and decreed you should view it as if he's got residence. Why? In order to prevent the Yisrael from living near the goy. But if the only level of rental that's needed is a weak one, and the goy will have no issue renting it to the Yisrael, then what have you gained? How are you going to explain the goy's reluctance to rent it to the Yisrael? Answers the Gemara, a goy will be suspicious. What's going on here? Why is this Yisrael constantly renting my section in the chotzer? Not only is just not only is renting it and he doesn't understand the concepts of Eruv, but not only that, he's doing it only on Shabbos, on Klal Yisrael's holy day, he's going to get suspicious that there's some sort of sorcery going on here. And therefore he's not going to want to rent and let the Yisrael take over his part in the Chatzar, and then we will have achieved, the Chachamim will have achieved what they wanted, and that is to make a complication, make it difficult for Yisrael to live close to a Goy. Continues the Gemara Gufa. We saw before, we saw before that, and this was Reb Meir's opinion before, that the residence belonging to a Goy is considered to a stable with animals, and it does not create the status of a residence, of ownership in the Chotza. And it's mutter, that means if you have a Chotza belonging entirely to Goyim, you have 10 homes which are sharing a courtyard, and each home belongs to a different Goy, and the Chotza is serving all 10 Goyim, then since it's considered as if there's one stable with 10 animals in it, then it's not considered as if they have different diros, different residences, and therefore if a Yisrael were to enter that Chotza, or one of the homes in the Chotza, the Yisrael would be allowed to carry from any of the homes of those Goyim into the Chotza. A Yisrael is allowed to carry from the homes into the Chotza, and from the Chotza into the homes, because it's just one stable. It's all considered one Rishus. However, and this is like we saw of Meir in our Mishnah, if there's even just one Yisrael that's living there, then Oyser, then the resident, all those Goyim, they actually restrict the Yisrael from being able to use the Chotza. Divrei Reb Meir, that was the opinion of Reb Meir. And Rashi says that this brisa that we're quoting now actually says that the Chotza, because all the Goyim are just considered like animals in a stable, then the truth is the Chotza belongs entirely to the Yisrael. He's the only, so to speak, owner of the Chotza. All the rest are just animals in a stable. So even though there's one Yisrael with all the Goyim there, the Yisrael will be allowed to carry from his own home into the Chotza, because his own home belongs just to him, and the Chotza belongs just to him. However, the homes of the Goyim, that's where the issue is going to come. The Yisrael is not allowed to carry, no Yisrael will be allowed to carry from any of the homes of the Goyim into the Chotza, because the Chotza belongs to the Yisrael, and the homes of the Goyim do not belong to the Yisrael, and therefore they will be considered as if you're carrying from one Rishus to another Rishus, and that's what it means that it's Oyser. When it says that Im Yesham Yisrael Echad Oyser, Divrei Reb Meir, what it means is it will be Oyser to carry from the homes of the Goy to the Chotza. And the Gemara is going to discuss this soon. Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov Oimer. Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov argues and says, "La'olam eino oyser achi ushnei Yisraelim oysrim ze al ze." Like we saw in our Mishnah, the issue will only ever be if you have at least 2 Yisraelim sharing the Chotza, and then if you have since Chachamim did not want 2 Yisraelim, which was something which was more common, to share a Chotza with the Goy, lest he learns from his ways. Therefore the Chachamim said you have to consider the Goy's Rishus as being one and having a residence, and therefore only if there's 2 Yisraelim there, then there's an issue with the Goyim. Continues the Gemara, Omar Mar. The Gemara is going to discuss the brisa we just learned. We just learned that the Chotza belonging to a Goy is similar to a stable with animals. That means there's no status of the Goy does not have any ownership and Rishus in the Chotza relative to the Yisrael, and it's not considered as carrying from one Rishus to a different Rishus. And we explained before, what does that mean? That the Chotza belongs to the Yisrael, and the Yisrael is not allowed to carry from the Goy's home into the Chotza, but he can carry from his own home into the Chotza. And the Gemara is asking, V'anan tanan. This seems to contradict what we learned in the Mishnah. What did we learn in the Mishnah? In our Mishnah, Hadori moivid kechavim b'chotzer. A Yisrael, or Meir in our Mishnah, says that if a Yisrael, even just one Yisrael, lives together with the Goy in a Chotza, Hareze Oiser Olov, then the Goy actually restricts the Yisrael from using the Chotza. And that seems to say that the Yisrael cannot even carry from his own home into the Chotza. Well, why not? So that seems to contradict the Brisa, where we understood in the Brisa that having a Yisrael living with the Goy, all it does is, the only restriction it makes, is that the Yisrael cannot carry from the Goy's home into the Chotza, but he can carry from his own home to the Chotza. In our Mishnah it seems to be, Harei Zeh Oiser Olov, that the Goy stops the Yisrael using the Chotza, even from his own home. Says the Gemara Lo Kasha. It's not a question. Ha de Isya, ha de Leisa. It depends if the Goy is actually there on Shabbos, or if he's not there for Shabbos. If the Goy is there for Shabbos, then he stops the Yisrael carrying even from his own Rishus to the Chotza. If the Goy is not there, then even though the Yisrael cannot carry from the Goy's house to the Chotza, because it's two different Rishus, the Chotza is attributed and associated to the Yisrael, and the Goy's house is not. However, from the Yisrael's home to the Chotza, that will be allowed because the Goy is not there. If the Goy is not there, then it's okay. Umayka Sovar. Now we're trying to understand this. What does Rameh actually hold? Ika Sovar Dira Beloy Bailim Shmo Dira. If he holds that a home with nobody living there, which is what we just said now, the Leisa, that the Goy is not there. If a home which with nobody there, presently there's nobody there, is considered, Shmo Dira is considered a residence, then even if you have a Goy whose home, who's not present, he's not there during Shabbos, it should still be considered as if he is there for Shabbos and should prevent the Yisrael from carrying from his own home to the Chotza. We just said now that if the Goy is not there, in that case, the Brisa says that Yisrael can carry from his own home to the Chotza. But if he holds that a residence without an owner, if the owner is not there, he's not present for Shabbos, lo yishmo dira, it's not considered a residence at all, afilu Yisrael nami lo nitzar. Then what happens if you have two Yisraelim sharing a Chotza? No Goy. And one of the Yisraelim are not there for Shabbos, then is the other Yisrael allowed to carry from his home to the Chotza? And we know that he cannot, because the Chotza belongs now to two people, and carrying from one Rishus to another Rishus is Asa. But if the Yisrael is not there, if you say that Dira b'loy bailim lo yishma dira, that if the owners are not present for Shabbos, it's as if there's no residence there, then even in the event that Yisrael is not there, why is the other Yisrael restricted from carrying to the Chotza without an Eruv? Answers the Gemara, La'olam kosova dira b'loy bailim lo yishma dira. The truth is that Reb Meir holds that if the owners of the residence are not there for Shabbos, it's not considered as if there's a residence there. V'Yisrael d'chi isya osur, when the Yisrael, in the event that there's two Yisraelim sharing a Chotza, when the Yisrael is there, then mi'ikar adin, then according to the law, then neither of the Yisraelim can carry in the Chotza, because the Chotza belongs to two residences, to two Yisraelim. And since when the Yisrael is there, it's also me'ikar adin, midrabanon, then kileisa goes rabbanon. And even if one of them goes away, and technically speaking, if the owners are not present, then the Chotza is only serving those people who are present, and therefore it should be mutter for the Yisrael to carry in the Chotza, even though the Chotza belongs to somebody else also who's not part of the Eruv, but that somebody else has gone away for Shabbos, and therefore is not relevant. However, the Chacham made a gzeira and said that if we allow you to carry, maybe you'll carry another week when he doesn't join the Eruv, even though he hasn't gone away for Shabbos. Oivid kechovim, however, in the case of a Goy, that even when the Goy is there, even when the Goy is there, in the halachas of Eruv, according to the rules, the letter of the law, there should be no issue, like we said before, because a Goy is just like in a stable, and he has no residence whatsoever in context of the halachas of the Eruv. And the only reason the Chachamim said you should view it as if there's a residence is in order to avoid the Yisrael living in close proximity of the Goy. And since even when he's there, it was only a Gezerah, Shemo Yilmaid Mimaisov, lest he learn from the ways of the Goy, then Ki Isya, when the Goy is there, Osir. That's what the Chachamim wanted. They wanted that when the Goy is there, that it should be complicated for you to be there with him. And therefore they said, you have to assume his residence is considered a residence. Kilesia, but if the Goy is not there, and even when he is there, it's just like an animal in a stable, and now he's not even there, Loi Osar, the Chachamim did not restrict the use in the Chotza. Asks the Gemara, V'chilesa Loi Osar, when the Goy is not there for Shabbos, then we say that there's no restriction of the Yisrael to use the Chotza. Votnan, we learnt in the Mishnah, Hameniach es beisai. If somebody leaves his home for Shabbos, v'holach leilish beis miracheres, and he goes to another place for Shabbos, echod nochri v'echod Yisrael, irrespective of whether it's a Yisrael or whether it's a Goy, oiser. Nonetheless, the Yisrael that's remaining behind cannot use the Chotza, because the Chotza belongs to another owner, even though the owner is not there for Shabbos. And it said explicitly in the Mishnah, that the Gemara just quoted, that irrespective of whether it's a Yisrael or a Goy, even if he's not there, there's an issue. Divrei Reb Meir, that's the opinion of Reb Meir. There seems to be a contradiction with the Reb Meir we saw before in the Brisa. Answers the Gemara, Hasam de'osi b'yoyma, that over there, where we say in that Mishnah, where we say that even though a Goy is left for Shabbos, the Yisrael is not allowed to carry in the Eruv. That is talking about with a Goy that's close enough that he could actually come back on Shabbos. And since he could come back on Shabbos, you might not know when he's coming back. And if he comes back, when he comes back, then the Chotza, you're not allowed to carry to that Chotza, as we saw before. And therefore the Chachamim said, even though he's gone away, you have to assume or be afraid that he may come back, and therefore you cannot use the Chotza. However, when we saw in the Brisa that when the Goy goes away, then the Yisrael can use the Chotza, that's what talking about where he goes so far that there's no chance he can come back on Shabbos. Continues the Gemara, Omer of Yudam Shmuel, Halacha Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. Said in the name of Shmuel, the halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov in the Mishnah, that when there's one Yisrael with a Goy, there's no issue with the Goy, the issue only starts when there's two Yisraelim. Rav Huna Omar, Minik Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. It was in the name of Shmuel when it says Halacha Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. You can even publicize and tell everybody, make it known that halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rav Huna says no, you should not publicize to everybody that the halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. But if somebody asks you a question, you're allowed to tell him that the halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. Minik Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. That's the custom. Rav Yochanan Omar, Rav Yochanan says no. Even if somebody asks you, you should not rule the lenient opinion of Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. Noagu oham Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. There are those that were accustomed to follow the lenient ruling of Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, and that means if somebody followed that ruling, you don't need to make a big noise about it, you don't need to rebuke him, and you can let things lay as they are. But if somebody asks what you should do, then we should not rule like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, rather like Reb Meir, and even if there's just one Yisrael with a Goy, there's an issue with the Chotza. And Mirz Hashem, in the next shir, we're going to continue from here.